Hi, how we doing? My name is David Mulhern. I'm doing, this is my YouTube channel, Chasing Skeptics. I'm here with Matt Dillahunty. Matt, it's great to have you. I appreciate you letting me stop by.
Sure, thanks so much for coming.
Absolutely. You know, I'll be asking you a series of questions that hopefully the viewers will be interested in. First question is, I want to quote you, and if I am misquoting you, by all means, let me know. You said on the Atheist Experience one time, you said, even if we knew that a God existed, and in this hypothetical example, we can communicate with the God, and you said what you would do is you would analyze what the God's beliefs and values were, and if the God's values and beliefs were wrong, you would go against the God.
Yeah, I mean, that's a rough paraphrase, but yeah, it's what I've said many times is that, for example, if the character of God is such that it's incompatible with, if it's evil, why would anybody worship it? And if it's not good, why would anybody? I don't understand why anybody would worship anything in the first place. I don't understand why worship is, necessary or a requirement or even a good thing. To me, one of the foundational principles of someone who is truly good is that they wouldn't need or require or even desire worship or adoration. Respect is the kind of earned thing, and so to say that there's a God who's good who demands or expects worship, to me is contradictory.
If the God, so say, getting back to the God's beliefs, like say the God had a belief you didn't agree with, like for example, say God said, and again, we're assuming we've proven its existence and we're communicating. If God said, gay people are offending me and they should stop, like what would be your reaction to that? And if the God was responsible for our existence, does that give the God authority over us?
Of course not. I mean, if I have kids, that doesn't mean I get to control their lives. If I, now the idea, can a God, this all-powerful being who created the universe and created us, sure, could he squish me like a bug? Absolutely. Could he force me to do whatever he wants? Seems to be the case. But might doesn't make right. And so this idea that just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should. If you create playthings and you want them to be obedient and do what you tell them, then you don't allow them to make their own decisions. But if you're going to allow them to make their own decisions and then punish them for making decisions you don't like, you're a bit psychotic, I think. And I probably shouldn't be using any psychological technical terms, but I mean it's bizarre to me to think that, oh, God made us, therefore he gets to control our lives or dictate whatever. Now, I mean, we can have debates on whether or not there's free will or what qualifies as free will, but as a thinking agent who seems to be able to make choices, then I can freely choose who I want to associate with. And I don't care to associate with anybody. Granted, I don't think a God exists, but I wouldn't hang out with Lord Voldemort either. But when we look at the character of God as described in the Bible, you've got somebody who's advocated slavery for, and depending on your interpretation, may be opposed to homosexuals. Well, I don't see how that bothers anybody. If two people who happened to have the same gender expression or gender identity or desire to be in a loving relationship, I don't know that there's anything you could do to really stop it other than forcibly removing them. But I don't see how that affects anybody else. Why do I care what goes on in my neighbor's house as long as we've got consenting adults who aren't doing harm to people?
That's a good point. When you were as many people know, you started out as a Christian. You even thought of going into seminary. When you were a Christian, like what did you like about Jesus then, and then I guess what did you find out?
Well, I was primarily Southern Baptist for about 25 years or so, although we occasionally went to Pentecostal churches, and I did for concerts. My parents didn't. Although my mom might be Pentecostal now, I really don't know. I think, like many other believers, I had fallen prey to two things. One is this idea that, I brought you into this world, I can take you out, kind of what you're talking about. God made us, we have as an obligation here our duty to live and try to live a Christ-like life, And so if you begin with that presupposition that this is your purpose in life, a lot of the other questions kind of get sidelined. It's perhaps a defense mechanism of a particular religion. But the other thing is that, even though I was in a Southern Baptist church, there were occasionally fire and brimstone type sermons, but most of it was focused on, love and turning the other cheek and being, decent to people and trying to draw more people into church and allowing the Holy Spirit to help you guide people to Christ and things like that. We didn't really focus on, social issues. We didn't focus on political issues, at least not that I recall. Obviously, I'm sure there were plenty of sermons against the liberal, secular, progressive, homosexual agenda. But I don't recall a lot of that happening. So it was mostly, I think one of the other things that kind of kept me there is that I didn't give it a lot of thought. Mm-hmm. When everybody around you believes the same thing, and I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, Wednesday night, Thursday or Friday, whenever there were
a lot of church
stuff. And I wasn't forced by my parents. The only time I was forced by my parents was Sunday mornings when I didn't want to get up because I'm not a morning person. The rest of the time I was going because I enjoyed it and because my friends were there. I don't know how much the social network may have been more important than the religious aspects, but it was this combination of the two. And when everybody around you believes something, and people have said before, well, have you ever felt the presence of the Holy Spirit, which is something that is kind of common in churches I was raised in. Yeah, except that I don't think that it was the Holy Spirit. When I'm standing there and we're singing and praising and you feel goosebumps and euphoria and just blissful, it's a hard thing to describe and you don't know what it is. But if everybody around you is feeling this and they're all attributing it to the Holy Spirit, then you do too. And so there's this constant reinforcement of your beliefs. And it wasn't until I figured out that I could have the same type of experience, the same quality of experience, although slightly different, from secular music, from art, from sex, from drugs, from whatever.
The natural body response.
It's what happens. It's what your brain does. This idea of pleasure. Just people respond really well to hearing their own name, and I think religions have been tuned, not intentionally. I don't look at this as a conspiracy, but religions have been tuned to make use of the psychological tricks that draw people in, while also poisoning them with an idea that they are the only ones that can offer a solution for. If we convince you that you've got a God-shaped hole in your heart or a Jesus-shaped hole in your heart, all of a sudden we're the only ones that can fix that. And it's like convincing someone they have a fictional disease and then offering to cure it with homeopathy. It's all water.
When people talk about their moral character, sometimes they will say, I do this and this and this because of the Bible. I am waiting for marriage to have sex because it's in the Bible, like you've heard, and many other examples. But of course, if you study the Bible, you know that the Bible is not this moral guide. There's plenty of crazy things in the Bible. Like, why do you think people will attribute their good decisions or their moral decisions to the Bible?
Well, I think people are lazy when it comes to thinking, and figuring out the why behind something is very difficult. And one of the biggest things is that we're generally uncomfortable with acknowledging that we don't know. I dealt with this a lot a couple of weeks ago. I was doing basically 3 or almost 4 days of debates in a row at a Church of Christ in San Antonio. They had a 4-day convention, and at each end of each night, into the first 3 nights, I'd have basically a 2-hour debate with somebody. And when I'd be asked questions that I didn't know the answer to, I'd respond with, I don't know. And then, on some occasions I talk a little bit more about how we might go about finding out, or why I object to people asserting that they do know. And they were just dumbfounded. And actually, so was David Robertson, I believe it was, who I debated on Justin Borelli's Unbelievable podcast in the UK. He just wrote an article just the other day about the debate saying, oh, Matt just kept saying, I don't know. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, if you don't know the answer for something, saying I don't know, but let's go find out, is how you get to an understanding of it. And if you're uncomfortable with that to the point that it's just visceral, that you're not going to accept that I don't know, you're going to be more willing to accept proposed explanations, whether they have any good reason, and evidence behind them or not. The pastor at that church, talked to me after the third night and said, are you really comfortable knowing, are you going to your grave with having to have said I don't know to so many things? No, I am not. This isn't about comfort to me. It's very troubling to keep saying I don't know, but when I have to be intellectually honest and recognize that if there's something I don't know, then I don't know it. And it doesn't do me any good to pretend that I know it or to accept, his position is basically, hey, we don't know where the universe came from, but this God explanation seems plausible. So I'm going to accept that until something else comes along. That is the classic argument from ignorance fallacy. The correct answer is, I don't know, because the God explanation for the universe has no explanatory power, which we'll probably get to in another question because I've derailed this one entirely. But this idea that our discomfort with not knowing, we're not really aware of ourselves and our motivations. As we learn more about the brain and we learn more about human beings sociologically, we understand that there's still a lot of like lizard brain mentality that's making decisions for you, and you're just you may be in many cases like a passenger. There's, like I said, there's a potential debate about free will, and if you don't understand yourself and your motivations, and you don't want to do the hard work of thinking about why something might be right or why something might be wrong, it's much easier to accept a list of answers that somebody else came up with. So, oh, thou shalt not kill. I'm not going to kill because it's in the Bible. Why? What difference does it make if it's in the Bible? I mean, it's kind of just lazy. Because, and it doesn't have to be. Because I don't think morality is nearly as hard as many people have made it out to be. I mean, there's huge debates about the foundations of morality and all this. And certainly there's lots of gray areas in the middle where we're going to have disagreements. But if you have to explain to somebody in great detail that it is wrong to murder someone and why it's wrong to murder someone, we've failed. You don't need anything more than an understanding that I would like to continue living. Other people would also like to continue living. A little bit of reason and a little bit of empathy demonstrates that it is in our best interest to support the idea that killing other people is wrong.
Could God exist or could a God exist?
I have no idea. It depends on how you define God. It's one of the problems that I've had with many people is they claim, somebody in an email just the other day said that until we get an explanation for the universe, God is the best explanation. And my question was, how can it be considered the best explanation when you don't know that it's true, you don't know that it's plausible, and you can't demonstrate that it's even possible? This idea, there are ideas that seem to make some gods are impossible. Some gods are, self-contradictory logically, and some are in contradiction with the universe. When you talk about a God who exists outside of space and time, what does that even mean? Because the word exist is necessarily temporal.
How about outside reality?
What does outside reality mean? Is there anything, do you have any good reason to think that there's something outside of reality? I mean, why couldn't reality be all there is? I don't even know what unreality is. We start talking about a universe from nothing, setting aside what the physicists mean. When the theists object to it, they're like, oh, something couldn't possibly come from an actual nothing. How do you know? Where was there a nothing for you to actually investigate? And could you investigate? I mean, you can't actually act on a nothing to do any investigation. So, it's one of the many things that may not even be knowable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a friend, as we spoke before, I came from the Northeast, and after we experienced 9/11, and I've asked this question in all clips, we, of course, the knowledge of Muslim suicide bombers wanting virgins in heaven for their acts, you know, that was a topic we talked about. And I had a friend who was an atheist, and he said, you know, of course he believes that when you die, that's it, you're dead and everything. And he said, these suicide bombers expecting virgins, they don't even get a chance to be disappointed. And I was thinking, like, there's a part of you wish they could be disappointed. You know, maybe, you know, they could know that they were wrong, or, I mean, whether that means there's another outcome.
Absolutely. Part of me wishes that everybody could know that they were right or wrong. I would love to have, one of the things that's appealing to me, or was appealing to me about the particular religion I was in, is that anything that I didn't know, I was gonna find out when I got to heaven. You know, God would answer all the questions then, and you know, who shot JR or Kennedy or whoever. How did the universe create? You know, how did he actually do it? What did it look like in the early days? Why did we get so many things wrong? You know, I figured all of those are gonna. There's no guarantee. You know, even if there was a God, the Bible's accurate. There's no guarantee that God's going to answer any of your questions. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'd love it if people were able to discover that they were wrong. I don't know for sure what the motivations of the suicide bombers were. I don't know how motivated they were by the idea of an afterlife with 72 virgins. It's something, it's something that seems to be a motivator. But I don't know what's in their head.
Mm-hmm. What did they have?
And, you know, it could have just been, these people might have just been convinced that they were going to their grave, but they had a duty to somebody else. So while, you know, I'm reluctant to actually put too much religious motivation on it, because I can't say either way. Mm-hmm. Yes, a part of me wishes that there was some kind of afterlife. Actually, part of me wants to live forever.
Right, until the sun eats the earth, right?
Well, even further. I mean, originally I had said that who wants, you know, I don't want to live forever, you know, in order for life to have some value, you know, it kind of needs to end. I changed my position on that. Because I looked at it in the sense of, oh, I'm going to get bored and there's not going to be anything left to know, you know, you'll be godlike, etc. And I don't think that's the case, because we live in a dynamic universe. It's always changing, which means there's always something new to learn. And you know.
That's an interesting point. So, I think I spelled this wrong when I emailed it to you, but do you find people's religious beliefs to be similar to that of like a pissing contest with children, where, or a situation where when someone's wrong but they don't want to admit that they're wrong, and it's more about them asserting themselves? See, I found that, like, when I experienced religious intolerance, when I would question someone and they get angry, it seemed like it was more about them asserting themselves than the religious belief, you know, being right, you know.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's a pissing contest on behalf of the actual beliefs. One of the things we know is that as soon as somebody makes a public profession of a belief, they become more entrenched and less likely to change their mind. And I think the reactions, it's very difficult for me to say, you believe something that I consider to be stupid, even though it's not always the first word that I choose. That to them is, you're stupid. Because if you're not stupid, why would you believe something that's stupid? This idea of separating you from your beliefs is very difficult, especially when we're talking about core beliefs and core values. And what I've said many times is that we're all stupid. We are all idiots and morons about many different things. And when I point out to somebody that they're being idiotic, or that I think that they believe something that's stupid, I'm not assessing their entire character. They could be brilliant in many other aspects. They could be genuinely good, even if they're being immoral in this instance. Well, the reaction comes not, I think the reaction comes from fear. It is a defense mechanism of these beliefs. Fear of questioning one's own beliefs, fear of being wrong. I think also it comes from genuine confusion, genuine misunderstandings about the subject that we're talking about. And because you can't seem to separate yourself from your beliefs, people take things very personally. I mean, I watch every episode. Some people would label it a guilty pleasure. I'm not guilty at all. I enjoy the show. And if you came up to me and said, I think that show is stupid, and you're an idiot for watching it, at most we're just going to, disagree. And I'm probably going to laugh it off and shrug it off. But if you come up and say, hey, you're a secular humanist. Well, the secular humanist positions are this and this and this, and I think that's stupid. Well, I'm probably not going to have the same visceral reaction that religious individuals are, because my secular humanism is founded entirely on reasoned argument and evidence. And so if somebody has good arguments for why I should ditch humanism, then I'll ditch humanism. Although I think that's highly unlikely. One of the things I've said about God is that if he's not a humanist, I don't want anything to do with it. Unless he could demonstrate, why there's a problem with it. So the defensiveness it's problematic, and it's difficult to pin down because people are going to react different ways for different reasons. And it's for the same note that people believe for different reasons. Otherwise, we'd have one knockdown argument that would just clean out religion right off the bat. That doesn't happen. People are convinced for different reasons, and they become unconvinced for different reasons.
Did you ever deal in your deconversion or whatever, did you ever deal with either a fear of hell or a fear of, like, some people when they're abandoning their religious beliefs, they think there's going to be some penalty in their fate, like they'll have misfortune? I mean, did you ever deal with that, and how should someone deal with that?
Yeah, I didn't actually have to deal with that. One of the things, I hear from people who've come out of religions, particularly Christianity, and I deal with a variety of different religions, but in the United States, the show's popular primarily amongst people who live in countries that are primarily Christian. And I've heard from many people who still wake up at night, been atheists for 50 years and wake up at night with a nightmare about hell. And people who, in their process of leaving religion, fear a hell and the consequences. Or they're grieving the loss of a heaven. And for me, it was really simple. If somebody had told me that when I was 35, I was going to inherit $1 billion, and I believed this for my entire life, and when I got to 35 and found out there wasn't $1 billion, that's going to be incredibly disappointing. But that any time I spend grieving about it, about something that I never actually had, is a waste. So I didn't have any grieving for heaven. I didn't have any fear of hell, because one of the things that I realized is when I was a Christian, I didn't spend any time worrying about the hells or the consequences of other religions.
That's an interesting thing, like of Hinduism or Islam or another.
Yeah, how much time did I spend worrying that I was going to go to, an Islamic hell, or how much time, and how do you figure this out? This idea that kind of the version of Pascal's wager, if you extend it to multiple religions, do you aim for the best heaven, or do you aim to avoid the worst hell? I mean, if you don't have evidence for any of them being true. And so when I look at them and I realized these others, I have no reason to think it's true, I'm not going to spend any time worrying about it. Now, if it is true, and there is a God who's going to, send me to hell, first of all, I'll go there knowing that I'm, more moral than that being. But there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, if I'm this limited being, I am at the whim and this God can do whatever they want with me. I can't do anything about it. And so it seems to me that the best thing I can do is live my life to the best of my abilities, to try to do good things and be a decent person, because that benefits us right here and now. And if I find out after I'm dead that there's an afterlife, if it's not based on the way I lived my life here, it's useless. If it's, did you believe? Or did you do what this particular book says is good? No. And I couldn't, belief isn't a choice in any simple sense. You are either convinced of something or you're not. And you can't force yourself to be convinced. I mean, you could tell me all day long that the Packers are the best football team ever, but if you don't offer me something to convince me, I'm never going to actually be convinced, and partly because I don't care. You got to first thing you got to do is give me some reason to actually care. And so when people keep pointing back to the Bible, as happened in this 3-day debate at the Church of Christ, it was the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, and there was never any demonstration to begin with of why anybody should care or pay attention to what the Bible has to say.
I'll ask the question again. So without there being judgment and an afterlife, does it seem that someone could get away with a terrible crime, like for example the Zodiac killer? He was a serial killer that killed people, and as far as I know, he never got caught. I mean, so in that situation, he kind of got away with it, and if there's not a God watching and there's no judgment afterwards, then, would it be better, would there be a situation where you'd be punished after death?
So yeah, it's entirely possible that somebody could get away with it. Would it be better if there was punishment after death? So we have a desire for justice, whether you're advocating, like a karmic system, or a system where a God, imposes justice after this life's over. I don't know that that's better. I would think justice in the here and now would be the optimal situation. And if there's a God who created a system in which justice isn't going to be served now, but only later, I think you could possibly argue that that might actually be unjust. The problem is, there is no system, even proposed, that I see as truly just. Because one of the things is that the God of the Bible, for example, is described as being perfectly just, but also merciful. And if you're perfectly just, people get what they deserve. And if you're merciful, then you don't necessarily give people what they deserve. And within some different versions of Christianity, for example, you could live your life just as a complete reprobate, murdering people, raping people, stealing from people, and as long as you make this attempt near the end of your life to redeem yourself and adopt whatever version of salvation this particular Christianity model has, then you escape. You not only escaped punishment here, you escaped punishment forever in the afterlife, because the idea that God could forgive you on behalf of all of these people that you've wronged is ridiculous. It's like if I smack you and leave and you never hear from me again, and somebody else comes up and says, "Oh, I'm really sorry for what Matt did." Well, it might make you feel nice towards that person, but it hasn't in any way made up for what I actually did. And Penn Jillette talked about in a discussion on this, I think it was on NPR, about how, if you're convinced that this is the one only life you've got, it's in your best interest to treat people right the first time, because you're not going to get to make up for it. And likewise, I was asked in Illinois, there were several Catholic kids at the back of this discussion. Russell and I were there. We did a little talk, and we took questions. And they asked which system was more beautiful. Specifically with regard to this, hey, people could get away with it. And I answered them then that I don't care which system is more beautiful. I care which one's actually true. But if we're talking about what's more just, the idea that somebody could get away with it exists globally, because God could offer leniency and mercy. But I don't see our desire for justice being a sufficient reason to actually believe that God exists. Even if there was a God who, this proposed God, was actually going to be accurately dispensing justice, that doesn't mean that it's true. It's still wishful thinking. It's like saying, I really, really wish that so-and-so would have been, punished, and it seems unfair to me, and I'm disturbed by the fact that I might live in a world where somebody could get away with it, and I'd rather believe in a world where even if they got away with it here, they're going to be punished afterwards. Well, that might make you feel better, but it doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean you have any good reason to think that it's true. And when we look at the situation in total, there's really good reason to think it's false, because a God that was actually dispensing justice and who cared about justice and was trying to make sure that justice was served wouldn't be waiting until an afterlife to do so. People would, this is the one and only life we know we get. All of the information that we have comes from this life. And it seems that we live in a universe that doesn't care, and that it's up to us to teach people about morality to take steps to understand the human condition, to do a better job with mental illnesses and things that lead to crimes, to help people deal with their violent tendencies, to their frustrations, and to build a world where we're never gonna hit utopia. But we should be striving for something that eliminates, poverty and disease as best we can, and these things that motivate people to do harm.
Being an atheist in Texas, is that, like, would you describe it, is that difficult? Because see, being from the Northeast, whether you believe or not, doesn't tend to really be an issue, but, a lot of people, certainly the people I interviewed this morning and yesterday said it was hard.
I don't live in Texas.
Oh.
I live in Austin. And Austin is this liberal hippie bastion of college students and let's smoke dope and go swim naked in Lake Travis, folks. It's not hard at all here. It would be harder in Lubbock or Amarillo or possibly Dallas and Houston. Now, that doesn't mean that we're immune. Certainly, we're at the Capitol. We've got a governor who's very, very religious, and we're dealing with a lot of state representatives and state senators, et cetera, who come from all parts of the state and are actively enacting legislation here on behalf of their religious views. So I'm fortunate that I live in the Capitol so that perhaps we can do something about it. Unfortunately, that is very frustrating. I think frustration is probably the biggest issue with being an atheist in Austin, is that much like atheists are isolated from all the religious people around them. I hear from people all the time, I'm the only atheist in my family, I'm the only atheist in my town. Well, no, you're probably not. But, as long as that's the case, you kind of feel ostracized. And while we can, clap our hands and woo, Austin is rock, this is amazing, we got South by Southwest going on and other stuff, we're kind of ostracized from the rest of the state. And the rest of the state gets to pretty much dictate the laws for the state. And so it doesn't matter. I mean, it'd be like if you had a hippie commune out in the middle of nowhere, life might be pretty good while you're there, but you can't really affect any change. It's not difficult for me. I mean, there've been a couple of
being on TV
death threats. I've been doing the show for, I don't know, eight or 9 years. Early on, there were a couple calls, where people were going to come down and shoot. There were also some calls where they were going to come down and punch me in my fat face for Jesus, which I thought was hilarious. And several people have called to say, can you give me directions to the studio so I can come down and kick your ass? And I was like, well, first of all, what kind of idiot would do that? But second of all, what kind of idiot needs directions to the public access studio? I mean, you could just Google. By the way, during the announcements on the show, I tell you where we're going for dinner, where we're going for happy, you know exactly where I'm going to be. So I don't really have any fear from those individuals. Also, I think most of them that would call in to do that just kind of want to get on the show or want to hear themselves talk. I'm far more concerned about the people who don't want to give me advance warning that they might want to do me harm. But generally, the reception in Austin is positive. I'm part of a number of different communities. I've been a magician my entire life pretty much, and I've become more active in the International Brotherhood of Magicians, the IBM ring here in Austin, going to lectures. And while I'm an out atheist, it's not the first thing I tell people. And if I say, I'm going to do a debate or a lecture, and somebody says about what, on occasion, I'll say, well, or at the time I was president of the Atheist Community of Austin, but I host the Atheist Experience and I do talks. On other occasions, depending on what I see from the person, I might say, I do talks on philosophy and religion and skepticism and atheism, and work it all in there so that they're not immediately taken aback. But there was a gentleman there who I would have suspected was probably religious, having known him for a while. And when he asked, what I was doing, I said, I do the Atheist Experience TV, and he's like, atheist, yeah! And yet he would have never said that, and that's one of the reasons why I've been a big supporter of the Out campaign that Dawkins started, and why I love what Dave Silverman's done with American Atheists, which is, we need as many people as possible to identify with the label so that it loses some of the stigma. Because for years, who an atheist is has been defined from the pulpit. What I knew about atheism and secular humanism is embarrassing, my entire time as a believer. And if that's the only information that somebody has, we're stuck. And so I don't want anybody to come out if they feel it's going to put them at risk. But those who can come out need to do so that we can build a world where it's safer for everybody to come out. It has been likened to coming out as homosexual. I don't think the two are exactly equivalent, but roughly analogous. I am different from you and you don't know it, and I need to tell you about it so that you can stop acting like a bigot towards my particular classification. And I think we have to keep doing that.
When you think about the future, and so it does seem to me like there are more atheists, certainly on the news, and it seems like there's more free thinking going on. But at the same time, when we see nations such as maybe Pakistan or Iran, and granted I don't live there, but it does seem like large amounts of children are being indoctrinated, large amounts of people have very intolerant beliefs. Like, when you think about the future, do you think things are getting better or worse?
Oh, I think things are definitely getting better. And I'm convinced that reality wins out in the end, and that eventually reason and evidence will convince most people. I don't think any religions are necessarily going to last forever, but religion as a category will probably always exist until such time as we become infallible. If we become infallible and religion's still here, then obviously religion's true. But as long as people can make mistakes in thinking, they're going to end up in some religion or another. As long as we allow for indoctrination into particular beliefs, that's going to continue. But I do think that the trend, which I hope continues, because it could always drop off. We could have, we were doing really great in the 19th century when, Robert Ingersoll who was known as the great agnostic, was having debates in newspapers with religious figures, and he was a speaker at the Republican National Convention. There were a group of individuals in the free thought community that I think got a little too arrogant. Like, oh, we've got this religion thing whipped. All these people who are informed and stuff, the intellectually elite, we're now going to be leading the world, and religion will just gradually slip away, and it'll be something for the peons, down below. And because of that, along with some other changes, we stopped talking about it. And there were, for a long time, the politics and religion. You don't talk about those at polite dinners and stuff. I think you should talk about everything.
And money too.
Not to force somebody. If somebody's uncomfortable with a conversation, obviously you shouldn't be having that conversation. But if you're around people and engaging, this is about who we are and the world that we live in and what we're going to do, I don't know how you can't have those conversations. And I don't run around, hi, I'm an atheist, and if I'm having dinner with somebody for the first time, hey, do you happen to, believe in Jesus or Allah or whatever, because I can, fix that. There's no reason for you to keep being so silly. I would never dream of doing that. But for the longest time, when people would raise the subjects, many atheist freethinkers would just kind of sit quietly. Maybe even play along. There still is. There are people who, even in the 21st century, have been pretty much run out of their town. I'm currently unemployed. And this happened at the beginning of January. I've been looking for work. I've got 15 years of experience. I live in this particular industry. I live in a city where the industry is pretty good. I know that I've lost one job possibility merely because somebody's going to Google you before they hire you. And if you have somebody who's deeply religious and they Google me, it's unlikely that they're going to hire me. And that's That's probably the biggest consequence to what I've done. And yet, I wouldn't change a thing.
But isn't that illegal though? Well, but I guess it's still hard to.
You can't, you'd have to demonstrate that this is actually what they've done, and that's virtually impossible to do. And it's really not worth it, because what are you gonna get out of it? You know, oh, we're gonna force you to hire somebody, so now you've got a miserable work experience. Or, you know, I would rather not work for the people who are gonna have a big problem with what I do. So I don't let it bug me too much.
Do you wish everyone was an atheist?
Yes. Kind of. So I wouldn't wave a magic wand and get rid of religion in the simple sense. I hear from people who say, oh, you know, why are you guys going after religion? Some people just need it. And I find that to be one of the most arrogant, condescending, belittling statements ever. Like, I'm good enough that I don't need that religious stuff, but there's people out there who are just too stupid or too corrupt, and they need that guidance. Well, they're not entirely wrong. If someone has become convinced that this is their moral guidance, and they need some moral guidance, until you give them a replacement, they probably need it. I wouldn't want to ever legislate religion away. And the only way I'd wave a magic wand and get rid of religion is if, in the process of getting rid of it, people had some of the instruction that had previously come from religion come from reliable, good sources, if they understand reason. I want people to give it up because they're convinced that it's not true, or because they're not convinced that it is true. And it's not so much that my goal is to make everyone an atheist. My goal is to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and to live in a world where other people want to do the same. And that's why skepticism is far more important to me than the atheism. I'm an atheist because I've applied my skepticism to religious claims that have not met their burden of proof, and therefore are not worthy, or not, you know, there's no justification to actually believe they're true. I would love for everybody to be rational, to be a critical thinker, to be a skeptic, and if that results in the elimination of religion and people identifying as atheists, great. But if it turns out there is a God, and this is something we can demonstrate reasonably, then I would want everybody to believe that if it were the true thing.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting, so you do want to maintain religious freedom, but do you think it would be beneficial to make it that you, and of course this wouldn't happen, but if we were able to somehow legislate that you can't teach kids religion until they're 21, do you think that that would be beneficial? I mean, I know it's a tough hypothetical.
No. So now we're into an issue of where does the state begin to infringe on the rights of individuals and the rights of parents. For example, my parents raised me, you know, pretty much in the church. I don't fault them for that, because they were being true to themselves, they were being honest, they weren't trying to deceive, they weren't trying to harm, they were legitimately trying to do what they thought was right. And because religion is so pervasive, that's probably always going to be the case. And I despise indoctrination. Whether it's somebody teaching people there is a God, or whether it's somebody teaching kids that there's not a God. Neither of those are things that I would actually advocate. But I'm also a big fan of freedom, and I'm a big fan of having rational ways to fix problems. So for example, if a parent raised their kid from the time they were born until they went out into the world to believe that right is left and left is right, that's still correctable. It's despicable that they would do this, that they would intentionally confuse, maybe not even intentionally, I don't, you know.
Maybe they thought it that way.
But they've taught their kids something that is wrong, that is harmful, that is confusing, that's going to cause them problems, but it's fixable. Because those are just labels to concepts, and you can redirect those. It's going to take some work. So when parents teach their kids about religion, I think that the solution is always more education. And so what I've been advocating is, I think public schools should not only have comparative religions courses, but that these shouldn't be electives anymore. It's, for now, religion is an important part of, I shouldn't say important, significant part of human culture. And it has been for, as far back as we can look. And why wouldn't you want people to know that? Because one of the best things, you want to make somebody an atheist, have them read the Bible in great detail, and be critical and be thorough.
And don't have anyone translate it.
Yeah. Seminary is notorious for producing non-believers.
Oh, really?
Because this critical examination, well, you've got the Clergy Project now, which is, there's over 550 current and former ministers the current ministers are people who are actually active in their church, in the pulpit, who no longer believe. But they haven't got the skill set to go out and do anything else, so they're stuck. This is their livelihood. What are they, oh, I don't believe anymore, and now you've lost your job, and you don't have a skill set that you can translate to anything else. My friend Jerry DeWitt, who was a former Pentecostal preacher, he didn't, I don't think he actually went to seminary, but after having found his way out and going through and working with the Clergy Project, he's a shining example of this. And there's lots of others, Richard Haynes and Teresa McBain and Dan Barker.
Yeah, she's in New Jersey, right, Teresa, I think.
She was actually, she's back in Florida. Yeah. But this, the seminary and reading the Bible, it's not going to always produce an atheist. But it can, and it does quite often, which is one of the reasons why the nuns are rising, along with the internet. Access to information, the ability to educate people, and ability to allow people to educate themselves, which I think is incredibly important. Because one of the things that we're a little bad at when it comes to educating people is that we teach what to believe instead of how to believe, or what to think instead of how to think. We teach facts, and we get dry, and we teach from this top-down authoritative kind of position. The things that I've learned, many of them that are the most valuable, are things that I learned on my own, because there was some effort there. And so having an internet resource, things like infidels.org, talkorigins.org, and things that give people information and allow them to explore it on their own, is the way to correct this. And I think if you had comparative religions courses as a required, I took a comparative religions course, I think my freshman year of high school, or maybe my sophomore year. And looking back on it, it's kind of weird, because we looked at a variety of world religions, and I was sitting there as a Southern Baptist. And so when I looked at these religions, even when we talked a little bit about the difference between Catholicism and the various Protestant religions, I would look at all the others and say, wow, those people are nuts. But I'm not. And coming to that realization that you don't have any better reason for believing what you believe than those others do, that's eye-opening. And so just giving people the information and letting them use it as they will later on, I think is probably a better solution than legislating what parents can teach their kids. But if there's a demonstration of clear harm, I am bothered by some of these cults and groups that homeschool and basically ostracize themselves and their kids from public, because we don't know what they're being taught. And I think while you as a parent, have a right to teach your kids what you think, you are not the owner of that child. You are the steward of that child. You have this obligation to teach them so that they can go out in the world eventually and be productive and not be little mini-me's. I think the community of freethinkers, atheists, skeptics, secular humanists, what I hear from them every time when people talk about how they're raising their kids, they are exposing them to religious beliefs. They're not teaching them what to think about religious claims. But these kids have exposure, and by exposing them to many you kind of, if you expose them to one, you indoctrinate them, and if you expose them to many, you inoculate them. And
I think Dawkins talks about that. He says, teach your kids, this is what the Christians believe, this is what they believe, this is what this believes, and everything. Yeah, so, and it is not like, for example, in North Korea, they want to indoctrinate and control the information. Atheists don't seem to want to do that. They don't want to control the information. As far as, I think you've talked about on the show that you can be wrong, but you can be justified if that was the information you had at the time. Like, say, so today is Sunday the 9th. Say next Sunday God manifested and explained everything. So, but right now you are right to be an atheist, even if it ends up being wrong. Does that?
well, yeah, one of the things that you got to kind of make clear is the burden of proof and what it means to actually be an atheist. And so, as an atheist, that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe there are no gods. What it means is I am not convinced that there are gods. So there's a difference. I've used a gumball analogy in the past where if I've got a jar full of gumballs, the number of gumballs in there is either even or odd, no other options. And so God either exists or doesn't exist. There's no other options. But what you believe about those options is not limited to just those two. You can believe that the number is even. You can not believe that the number is even, which doesn't mean that you believe it's odd. So you can believe that a God exists, and you can not believe that a God exists, which doesn't mean that you necessarily believe God doesn't exist. So these are the only two possibilities, God exists or God doesn't exist, but they are independent claims that are evaluated separately. When we construct logical arguments, when we reason, we don't address a question. Does God exist? Let's discuss logically. No, you began with assertion, God does exist, and then you evaluate that. And you begin with the other assertion, God doesn't exist, and you evaluate that. Because the proposition of a God existing is generally, in most cases, for most gods that people believe in, untestifiable, unfalsifiable, I don't think that we can make a good demonstration either way. There are certainly God models that I think we can demonstrate either absolutely could not exist because they're logically contradictory, or almost certainly don't exist because we don't live in the kind of world we would expect from that God.
Would it surprise you if a God existed?
Definitely.
It would surprise you.
Absolutely.
What type of questions? I mean, say when we die, we're in sort of like a waiting room, like a doctor's office, and there's, I guess, an angel secretary, and she says, okay, you're going to go into this room in a minute and you're going to meet God. I mean, what kind of questions would you start formulating, I guess?
Well, I guess the first one is, how do I know you're a God? I mean, because one of the things that baffles me is, we are, take for example the Christian model, and I'll keep kind of picking on this one because it's my area of expertise, and it's the one that I deal with most often. If I'm a limited being, and I don't have absolute knowledge and superpowers, and I can't do anything miraculous, and there is a being that can, how do I know that that's a God? How do I know it's the God? How do I know it's the right God? I've asked Christians many, many times, and not everybody believes in a literal Satan, but for those who do, who think there's a God and a Satan, how did you determine that God is the good one and Satan is the evil one? If these are supernatural beings that could both deceive you, and you are incapable of assessing them at an appropriate level, Arthur C. Clarke pointed out that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, that applies also in the religious realm, in the superpower realm. Maybe Superman qualifies as a God. What qualifies as a God? But if you're going to say you're the God, the one God, how do I know? And then how do I know that you're a good one? And even if I figured out that you were a pretty good God, what does that mean to me? What exactly are your requirements? And why do you have requirements? Why on earth would you put me in a universe, give me a brain, and in a universe that seems to be addressable through reason and empirical observation and evidence for everything else that's important to me? And yet the question of your existence which you're now going to make a contingent condition upon my afterlife, is something that isn't approachable with reason and evidence. Or why didn't you just make it obvious to everybody? I mean, if a Damascus Road experience is good enough for Saul, why isn't it good enough for everybody? If the miracles that the ancient Israelites witnessed are good enough, why aren't you doing that all the time?
Yeah.
Why is it that some people seem to be getting special treatment, and the rest of us who would sincerely like to know, and who presumably you would like us to know as well? And so that's actually one of the things that I sorted out with my parents, because they're believers, and they felt terrible about the fact that I'm an atheist. And I said, look, you believe there's a God, you believe that he has a plan, you believe he wants me to know he exists, so pray. Pray that God reveal himself to me, because if God reveals himself to me, I'm not going to just deny it. But there's a lot of questions to ask. Number one is, how can I, as a limited being, ever come to the conclusion that you are a God, let alone the God? And then I am forced, people get so mad when I say I'm more moral than the God of the Bible. I am, absolutely, without question. I got in this debate that I did at the Church of Christ, we got on the subject of slavery, which is specifically advocated in the Bible, and I stood up and I said, look, I could write a better book, a better moral guide than the Bible right now, and I can prove it to everybody, because I could rewrite this entire book word for word, and instead of saying slavery is allowed, say slavery is not allowed, and the book would be better. There's no denying this, although they denied it. They flatly denied it. And people will come up and say, who are you to question God? Who am I to not question God? Isn't this, you believe in a model where God created people, and we're supposed to assess this God. We're supposed to realize that this God is perfect and good and moral and just. Those are all assessments we have to make. And if somebody tells me they're good and they're advocating for slavery, they're wrong. And by the way, if your God gave me this brain and the ability to assess, what kind of God would ask us to not assess their character? And if that's the situation, then I have to keep continually asking, how did you determine that God is the good one? And I asked this of David Robertson on that Unbelievable podcast recently, and he went in circles. I'm judging Jesus by Jesus' standards. I'm judging Jesus by Jesus' standards. Well, Hitler, if you judge Hitler by Hitler's standards, he's going to come out smelling like roses. That is the very definition of a circular art. Well, no, because you can't define good if it's not for Jesus. Yes, I absolutely can. Well, the new apologists are making all sorts of claims, like you can't have logic or reason without me. God is logically necessary to be able to reason. And they're doing the same thing with morality. God is morally required to exist in order for there to be any moral assessments, which is just false. In any given situation, I can evaluate all of the possible actions, and some of them are going to be better than others. Some of them are going to benefit us, and some of them are going to harm us. Now, we're not going to be able to necessarily put them all in a pecking order, and there's going to be some discussion and debate in the middle ground and things. But shooting me in the head and not shooting me in the head, we can tell which one of these is going to be better and which one's going to be worse. And the ones that are better, we label them good. That's it. It's not that good is some magical extant entity, intrinsic property.
I think Don Baker talked about that a society can decide that morality is based on well-being.
Well, see, there's a slight little confusion I need to correct there, and that is moral relativism is this idea that morality is a construct of society, so that there's no moral truth, and if this society says X is moral, then it's moral. I reject that completely, because if this society...
Because then you have like African cultures where they, for example, I saw a picture of a woman whose neck was